Okay, so this user group meeting, we're basically going to run through some of what's new in Claritas for the upcoming V6.5 release, which we're hoping to send out next week, but certainly before Christmas. So one of the first sort of updates to the project management interface. This is now not only available from the projects tab of the launcher, but also via the SizeCat application. So I will bring up SizeCat and get it onto the screen. So now in the project pane, if I right mouse button and click, we get a whole bunch of new capability and functionality. We can show project details. So if I click on that, it'll basically bring up some of the project information about the project I'm currently highlighting. So we can see the root directory of where everything is written, where the data directory is stored, and where the nav directory is stored. We can also look at list the project subdirectories that exist in this project, see what's there, and we can also browse any project files that we want to look at, so we can basically go into the different directories in there and have a look at the jobs, etc., that exist for this project. We can again archive a project from here. It'll again bring up a simple Qt interface with a couple of mandatory parameters, so i.e. the output dataset name we want to create, the folder we want to save this to, and then everything else we can either leave as the default, so the compression type, or whether we want to include data and nav folders in this archive. I won't actually run that, but basically that's the parameter form. I can also restore an archive project. So if I select a project from somewhere, so in this case I will go and find our example tutorials. Select an archive. I can select where I want to store it. So I'll put it on the C drive. I can define, if I've got a system set up where I've got separate areas I want to put scratch data, i.e. my main data set saves, I can define where I want to put those. I can either allow it to default to the project name of the archive when it was archived, or I can give it a new project name. And again, same for site owner and any comments. I can either leave them blank and anything in the archive will be picked up, or I can fill these in myself. I can decide whether I want to restore the data and nav directories, whether I want to register the project at the same time. When I'm restoring, I can check that there's enough disk space on the system that I'm restoring it to. And if a project of the same name exists, I can allow the existing files or directories to be overwritten if that's what I want to do. So if I click on the restore button, you can see that there is then also a progress bar displayed as it starts working through the restore. And hopefully this won't take too long. So you can see that's run through. Again, on all these parameter forms, there's a help button, which is linked into our manuals, so it takes you to the project and data manager area. When you click on that, you can check on the different functionality. Cancel. If I then click on the refresh button, you can see that the new project has been added to the lists available in the SizeCat application. I can also create a brand new project, so if I've got a new project or a new set of data I will work on, I can click on the create new and define my new project name, where I want to store it, etc., and it will generate a new standard Claritas project setup for me. which I can then start using. It will add that to the project registry, which is then will show it in the SizeCat application, and also from the drop-down menus when I select a project within the launcher. So it gives us more functionality within SizeCat, so SizeCat's a more valuable application for the user. The forms are a bit slicker and a bit easier to use, and they're using Qt graphics rather than the old Xwin graphics setup. Generally, we feel it's a bit slicker and a bit nicer than it used to be. And hopefully what we're going to do in upcoming releases is add further functionality to SizeCat so it becomes a more valuable application within the suite of tools that we supply. If there's any questions about the project management layer, cool, then I will move on. All right, then a new module within the V6.5 release of Claritas is the Add SPS module. So if you're working with land data, you can basically, previously you had to load the SPS files into the geometry application to import them into your trace header. Now we can use the Add SPS module basically to read those SPS files and import the XY coordinates of the source and receivers and the peg information, receiver peg, shop peg numbers, etc., into the trace header directly. So it's a fairly simple parameter form. We can either define the SPS files that we want to read, or we can read in a .sps list file, which if I edit that will show you. There we go, comes up and shows you what's in there. So it literally is, in this case, just the RPS for the receiver peg information, the SPS file for the shop peg information, and the XPS file, which gives the relationships between the two files. We can define the version of SPS that we're reading, and in this case it's 2.1, whether it's a 2D or 3D data set, and the number of digits that the receiver peg or shop peg are comprised of. And then in terms of, there's a few hidden parameters that we can generally default to, but we can sort of define any unsurveyed receiver or shop pegs that we want to include. Origin, false origin if we want to subtract a false origin from the data, and swath multiplier. So if it's been recorded, if it's a 3D data set recorded in swaths, we can basically add a swath multiplier to the shot IDs to make them unique within the data set. And then what we could also do is add a make geom module into the job flow, so that we can basically then write it out into a geometry database, which we could then go in and assign our CDP geometry to straight away. If we want to, we could basically take it as a two-step flow of checking that the SPS is imported correctly into the trace headers and then moving on. So if I then run this job, you can see it basically a very simple, some warnings about some shop pegs not having information. And then we can basically check it with the range module, what information's gone into the trace header. So in this case, we can see that we've got the source and receiver coordinate information, source and receiver heights, and then down towards the bottom of it, we have our shop peg, receiver peg information also into the trace header. And then we could go into the geometry tab, set up, and select the geometry that was output by the make geom module, and then go and build our CDP geometry at this point, which we can then import back into the trace header when we need to start using CDPs. So this is, we feel, going to be particularly useful for land seismic crews where they're maybe getting, certainly using nodal software or nodal systems, where they'll be getting a certain amount of data every day that they can import and add the SPS survey information into the trace headers at that point. Check that against the information that's recorded by the system as it's acquired, and confirm that everything's hanging together as they expect it to. So that's really all I'm going to say about add SPS. I think it's fairly sort of self-explanatory as to what it does and how it works. Yeah. Alongside this module, we also have a new module called SynGeom. So what SynGeom does is takes an existing geometry database, I'll take that one, and basically creates synthetic trace data associated with the geometry you have. So for every receiver shot peg, it will create a trace with all the trace header information from the geometry in the trace headers. So again, I can run an example of this. So again, you can see basically what we'll have is a second long trace. We then need to decide what sort of synthetic data we want to import in there, whether we want to put a Ricker wavelet or something like that, or a spike pulse in there. Okay, yeah. So it then allows us basically to use this data maybe for migration impulse test responses or something like that, or just as an additional QC on the back of the geometry application. It's particularly useful in-house for us as well, where we get data sets where the clients have some problems with the geometry, where we can use this rather than them getting them to send us the data. We can generate some data off the. Okay. Okay, so Jonathan's just pointing out that if I specify used in the range module, then any of the zeroed headers that have no values in them will be ignored, and I will just get traces with values that have been imported, so it makes looking at the range module a little easier. So again, I think there's not a lot to say about the SynGeom module beyond that, but maybe of use to people. Then we'll have a look at probably what is one of the big ticket items, if you like, for this release, which is CVA and the restack option within that application. So if I click OK, we'll build a stack on load. So I'll come up with a parameter form requesting some information on stretch. So I will just make some manual changes to a couple of locations, and I'm not necessarily saying that the picks will be better, they just will be different to highlight. And then I can click on, if I pull up the main stack and click on the restack button, it will then go away and restack the entire stack section. And then if I toggle back and forwards, you can see the changes between the restacked section and the original stack that we created on load, which is around where I've made the changes to the velocity analysis. But because they're using the same parameters for the stacking, there are no other sort of changes because of mute differences, etc. So this basically allows us, or allows the user to QC and confirm that their velocities are giving them the improvement they want within the CVA application, rather than having to come out and create a stack comparison job or read two stacks into the size view application and compare the results, decide that there are areas where they want to go back and do some further additional work on the velocity field, and have to reload everything back into CVA, go to the areas they've identified that need to be changed, make the additional changes they want to, come back out, restack. It's less disjointed. You can certainly make all the changes you need in one go. Once we start changing the velocity analysis locations within where we've already made changes, then we will basically just see updates between two velocity points rather than the entire data set restacking. So it will update on the fly as we process through. So we feel this is a significant improvement to functionality within CVA and makes the user's life a lot easier, a lot simpler for them to basically derive an optimal velocity field. Yeah, I guess that's...
Sorry, you're saying it'll restack on the fly?
Yeah, so if I pull up the semblance and then start shuffling, you can see up that top end the events changing, so I can, so on most computers the processor is going to be powerful enough that you can use that functionality, but if you were running on a very low spec system, you might not want that to be running, so we can change the Windows behavior parameter and basically set it so that we don't update on the fly if required. So if you're on a very low spec laptop and you were seeing some delays, or it was affecting how you were trying to work and slowing you down significantly, then you can turn that off, and then basically just by clicking the restack button every now and then it would create that new stack for you every single time. But on most systems you should be able to leave that on the fly behavior there and be able to work through it. I think that's pretty much for everything we've done for CVA, beyond some behind the scenes work on mute and velocity interpolation stuff, which should not be apparent to the user. Then something else that's new on the launcher for V6.5 is the image suite. On previous release, this was run from the command line, so you had to know the relevant alias to type in to the command line to get it to run. Now it's a button on the launcher. If we click on the button, it'll bring up our image suite application. So this allows you to have access in a simple, easy to use interface for things like our interpolation algorithm, our 3D SRME multiple modeling capability, our Kirchhoff pre-STM, and our receiver and source deghosting application, Octave. These all run from either currently not a good choice. So basically we can read a data set in, it'll scan it and then populate the parameter form for us with the relevant parameters, and then we can define for whatever application we're using, the parameters we want to use to either deghost it or migrate it, etc., etc. For most full Claritas users, then the job flows are probably might be the way they still want to go. But if you've got a data set that you've received in from a third party in SegWi format and you just want to run a quick and dirty migration or something like that, then you could basically import it directly into this and run it through the migration algorithm without having to convert to internal Claritas formats. Right, so that's what I'll say about the Image Suite application. There's a video already online on how to use Image Suite, both for Octave, 3D Pre-STM at the moment, so you can look at those for the functionality and how to use it. What I will look at now is the range application, the range module, and some of the other sort of modules where we've made some changes. So the range modules had some additional functionality added, in that it now basically plots the mean amplitude, the RMS amplitude, and the standard deviation of sample values at the bottom, as well as the previous sort of data min-max amplitude values that it plotted. This was a request from, well, it's part of the way through to implementing the full request from Total, which is to have some sort of Gaussian distribution displayed out of range. But we feel this is a stepping stone towards what they want, and we'll see how well it's received by them before moving on. I can add in another module that's been updated is the Bin 3D application. So Bin 3D now has the capability from the start from parameter to either work as it always has done, which is take source and receiver coordinate information and use that information aligned with either the geometry file or a grid file to bin the data into CDPs. But now we can also basically start from CDP or inline crossline and repopulate the coordinate information based on the 3D grid. So this can be useful for some applications externally from Claritas, where they'll basically just output a data set with no XY coordinates in the trace headers. And with this, if you've got the grid file, you can then take that information along with the inline crossline values that exist in the trace header and I think that's, yeah, there's the usual amount of bug fixes and stuff in the update as well. And then we also have a bunch of updates being either finished or added to the different tutorials that we run. So the marine tutorial should be updated and available to users shortly after the actual release of the software, and it'll be set up and configured correctly for the V6.5 release and highlighting some of the new functionality. And then we're working on the land tutorial, and we'll work our way through the other tutorial data sets that we have and get those up on our FTP site available for users as soon as possible. And then just finally, I'll pull up the release notes. So again, all updates and improvements to the software in V6.5 can be found in the release notes, which are available from the Help tab of the launcher. There's also some information on what versions or what operating systems we're going to be supporting for the 6.6 development cycle. So we'll drop CentOS 5 and support CentOS 7 and Ubuntu 16 for the next release. And basically covers a lot of what I've been talking about for the 5. I'm going to